I guess a good point to start is an introduction. So could you please describe your background and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nihil Khaine. I'm CTO of ApexQubit. I have background in computer science. More specifically, I'm actually coming from hardware, as you do. So I was doing artificial intelligence for like last 7 years. In the beginning, it was more like, very abstract thing for me. I was really curious about the intelligence itself. And I was trying to get how the humans actually work. But then there was like the summer of artificial intelligence. And I was like, whoa, I can actually join that. It's like, it's much easier to validate your understanding of the artificial intelligence when you see how it works, when you can engineer stuff. So I was doing artificial intelligence for the last 7 years. I've been really curious about the biology, physics, etc. So I was just, discovering a lot of things on my own for a very long time. And then there was a very great opportunity for me to join the company and actually do what I always wanted to do, to merge all of that, computer science or mathematical knowledge for physical or biological systems. So that's actually how I joined and what is my background. And just to mention, I really love the intelligence anywhere. And specifically, I was really curious to learn how mental disorders work in general. So that's a very curious topic for me, as it allows you to understand how mechanisms work and gives you a very interesting perspective on how to engineer things. And that's where I get most of my passion to the intelligence from, my kind of creative way of building things.
Yeah, and so pretty much you're saying that your company works in the field of combination of mathematics, physics, and biology, right?
Well, precisely, yes. More specifically, what we actually do is like trying to combine the classical machine learning and quantum computations, which are both just fancy mathematical stuff combined together with some physical aspects of reality.
Yeah, and then what's the main challenges in the field? So what's the main, let's say, goal for the company?
Okay, so ideally the main goal for our company is like, speeding up the drug design process. So we really have a very nice example. So recently we had a COVID breakout, and it's like it just changed everyone's lives. And we see that if we are not able to react to diseases in like 1 year, it's just a cap. Otherwise, we can perish if, let's say, something like COVID will be more lethal or something. And that's pretty natural. So recently I have read a book, and it has a really, curious reference to that. So the idea was that evolutionary process in bacteria is like much more rapid than in more complex organisms, as ourselves or animals or whatever large enough. And that allows them to really evolve in a very rapid and structured and directed way, as we do with our computer science algorithms. And that's really curious, and that makes a very dangerous game for us, as bacteria or viruses are able to modify themselves in a very rapid way, and we can really be frustrated around that. And the only way to solve the problem is to really dive into computer science for, outcompeting them on a speed scale.
So pretty much you're saying that, so what's the main challenge for the computational part? So you want to develop drugs faster than bacteria, right?
Well, I would say that's a good analogy. Ideally, yes, but on practice, at least faster than pharma companies doing right now. So it's like, boosting them like 10 times, as everyone says in the startup scene. So it will be nice to do it at least 10 times better than it's done right now.
Yeah, so pretty much, let's say if you take a standard approach, the approach of your company is to use machine learning, and this new method proposes a way to develop drugs 10 times faster.
Well, ideally, yes, but I want to clarify. So there are many companies who are doing somewhat like the same for the last 5 years. And what we see is that there is a wall that does not really allow to do it this way. The wall is the preciseness of computations. If you do that with the classical computers, you're not getting either fast results or accurate results. It's like a trade-off. And unless you combine quantum computations and the classical ones, it seems like we're not really able to get really fast and accurate results. We can get something meaningful, but not the best of the best, and that might kill actually all of us at some point of time, at some point of history of the human race. So that's what we're trying to solve.
So what you're saying is that classical computers are not powerful enough to solve these problems. Therefore, we have to combine classical with quantum, and then maybe we have a power to really discover drugs faster.
Well, yes, I suppose so. So if you really want to compete with the bacteria, I think the best way is to outcompete them on the level which is inaccessible for them. They're not able to utilize the quantum mechanics in there. And this, well, it's a very nice opportunity for us.
And what do you see the role of quantum computers here? Especially right now, we don't have very powerful computers. Do you think that it's possible to use quantum technology somehow, even in the, let's say, in the short terms when the computers are not so powerful?
Yeah, I see the point. So yes, actually that's a very nice point because, well, so on the classical side we have them now, but they are not that powerful. On the quantum side, we have that, okay, theoretically they're really great, but we're not getting them like in a 10 years on reasonable scale. And our proposal is to combine them in such a way that we get advantages of both worlds on the classical and the quantum. So the classical just solves the problem it can solve very well, and the quantum just helps with the parts which are not solvable reasonably on the classical one. And that allows us to trade off between the accuracy and the speed, as I have mentioned before. And let's say, instead of waiting for 10 years to get very nice results just on the quantum or maybe in a hybrid solution, we have like, let's say 5 years to get something at least reasonable on combination of those.
Yeah, and maybe can you give some numbers? What type of quantum computers would you like to have in terms of how many qubits? Because this is, of course, the hot topic right now, because everybody is asking how powerful quantum computers should be, right?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky question for one reason. So number of qubits is not the only thing you need to care about. There is a fidelity actually between them, so you need to synchronize them. You have to not to lose the information, the entanglement between them. And thus, in the end, I think IBM actually coined the term of quantum volume.
Yeah.
And unless we are getting a reasonable quantum volume, we are not able to solve the problems. Well, it's hard to say which amount of quantum volume we need to solve, real world problems, but it seems like for at least just for the toy scale problems, we need to scale like maybe 10 times more than we have now. We're keeping the same fidelity, and it's not that easy. It's not linear in this sense, meaning that it might be really hard to do so in the next. So they say they can double the amount of qubits every year or 2 years, let's say 1 year. We can maybe make them like 16 times larger, but in the end, if the fidelity changes, we are not getting the reasonable results. And thus, that's a tricky question.
Yeah, and so right now you're developing a set of algorithms, right?
Well, more precisely, we're focused on the more on the classical side for now. On the quantum side, it's like proof of concept solutions. So it's like we're trying to work on a really toy scale, as everyone does in the domain. And if you are getting anything reasonable on the toy scale, it seems like it must scale if we get reasonable hardware.
But so what's, let's say, the main challenge to develop software for or develop algorithms? Because as far as I know, there are not so many nice algorithms, and most of them are kind of old, let's say, short algorithms, right? So they were developed years ago. But do you see like it will be a speed up in development of algorithms in the next future, in the coming future?
Well, what I can say on the quantum side of things, of algorithms, well, all of these old algorithms, they're pretty good for many purposes. So you can actually combine them. So for example, a quantum Fourier transform, it's like very universal for many domains of problems. And if you can utilize it on a reasonable scale, then you're able to solve many problems, ideally.
Yeah.
In terms of creation of new potential algorithms, I'm not quite sure we can really speed up on creation of something, because it's like a research. You never know how long it will take to make something work, really. And well, the last years actually gave us very heuristical approaches to what we get on the quantum. For example, there is an idea of hybrid quantum classical neural networks, which are you have just classical neural network, you just change a few layers to the quantum units, and you get like a disentanglement of some quantum dependencies, which are then sent to the classical network. does it work? Does it help? Who knows? So it's like, it's really hard to say if it works, but all of these heuristical algorithms might be reasonable to try, and they're much easier to develop. And that's something many people are trying to figure out.
Yeah. And let me maybe step back a little bit and ask the question about, right now we're talking about mathematical, let's say physical description of the problem, but eventually we're talking about practical medical problems, right? So what is the
Yeah.
link? So you describe a drug discovery as a mathematical problem?
Okay, yeah. Well, basically, yes. So let me just dive a little bit deeper into what is drug discovery.
Yeah.
So drug discovery, it has lots of stages, depends on the pharma company, doesn't matter for us. Let's just divide it into 3 sections. So the first section is like, okay, so there is some kind of a disease, malfunctioning, whatever. It's caused by something, so there is a target in the body we need to actually attack. So that's the first idea. The first stage is to figure out what is the target, what are the properties, how to interact with it, etc. So what causes a disease? The second stage is actually a drug design. So we are primarily focused on this stage. The idea is to create, optimize some potential molecules which are efficient at attacking this potential target and changing its behavior in the body, and thus fixing some kind of disease or something. And the last stage is actually trial. So we need to figure out if everything works well, not only on the level target and the drug, but also on the level of cells, the organism, even more precisely, mice, then man, whatever. So all of these 3 stages are really important in there. We're primarily focused on the drug design, the middle stage. There is a reason for it. The reason is pretty simple. So that's the only part which does not require you to make a very, expensive modeling, let's say, of human bodies or cells or whatever. So to understand the disease, you need to understand the human body. To make a trials, you need to understand human bodies. And these systems are quite hard to do it computationally. And this, unless we have some physical labs or possibility to test something on people or even animals, it's really hard to scale. So this we are focused on the drug design. So diving more specifically on the drug design, most of the problems are like, you can formulate them in a mathematical way. For example, to generate new potential molecules, you actually just have to recombine many details you already have in the chemistry and just construct new molecules and predict their properties. All of these are like, well, reasonable mathematical problems. You just need to construct some functions which do a few of these steps. So that's it. So you can translate that to a mathematical problem, and then you can solve it, let's say, with machine learning or quantum computations. In some ways, machine learning is better. In some ways, quantum computing is better. Sometimes neither of them work. Specific space in that sense.
Yeah, and what type of background people need to work on this field? Because you mentioned that it's kind of a combination of drug discovery, biology, mathematics, physics. So what type of background do you need to really work on this problem?
Well, this is tricky questions of management, hiring people. So I was hiring people for quite a while, and well, almost no one has a background like in everything.
Yeah.
Well, that's really nice when people, there is a very brilliant computer scientist. He's really nice in machine learning, and he has some knowledge on the quantum, on the biology. I think that's like an ideal candidate. It's like no one will ever know all of these domains very precisely to solve the problem. So we're trying to hire people who are like very good at something, and they have a very broad background or understanding of things. I think like anyone from any of these domains, if he is like very broad in his intelligence, it's totally fine to work on that problem. It requires mostly the very precise wit, and thus you're able to take on the problem.
Yeah, and when we're talking, let's say, about very advanced field, let's say quantum machine learning, this field is very new, and I think it's like cutting edge even of the quantum computing. So how you develop these new things in the quantum machine learning?
Okay, I see. Well, as we're both from the hardware, maybe when you're looking at the quantum hardware and then you're going back to your head and remember what hardware we have on the classical side, you're like, well, that's really easy in there. And that's what's happening in the quantum side. Most of the algorithms are brilliantly easy, or, well, they're simple, but you need a lot of background to understand the simplicity, and it's not always that easy to get to that point. But mostly, the state of affairs allows you to, well, articulate in many ways around these problems. But anyway, so the quantum machine learning is really interesting field, but there is a controversy. Some people say that it's like a holy grail, another one. But some people say that it's like, well, we're not even ready for the classical quantum algorithms, but machine learning, yeah, so there's a lot of controversy. My personal opinion is like, well, I'm the guy from machine learning side, and I have a feeling that the quantum mechanics actually gives a lot of advantage for some processes, and it might be a very fruitful combination or symbiosis between the machine learning and quantum computations, but I think that we might not be able to get there in a few years at least.
Yeah, but is it like that you can take approaches from the classical machine learning and apply them in the quantum machine learning, or it's not so straightforward?
It's not so straightforward in some cases. So for example, let's say, so the quantum computations, they're very specific in the sense that they require, for example, reversibility of computations. Otherwise, you're losing information or dissipation of heat. And thus, well, most of the operations which are used in the classical computations, so as far as I remember, not AND, right? So that's the basis for our classical computations, and it's not reversible, and thus you're not able to do so on the quantum side. And that changes a lot on different levels of abstraction. So there is like emergency of restrictions on how you can build algorithms or schemes in the quantum side. So yeah, it might be tricky most of the time.
Yeah, and the main reason to use quantum is because you expect this speed up in places where classical is not. Classical could not really help you anymore because you need already supercomputers, and even then they're not powerful. Then you have to do really quantum approach, right?
Well, in our case, it's more related with the nature of the problem, not with the speed itself. Because the nature of the problem, biochemistry, is like quantum nature. And thus the classical computers are not really able to model the quantum dependencies, quantum probabilistic effects, such as entanglement between the particles. And thus, it's much easier to do so on the quantum computer. And we're naturally getting the advantages because our data is already quantum. We don't need to invent anything on the data side.
Yeah, but so we're talking mostly about, let's say, quantum simulation, or it's still really quantum computation? Because when we simulate, let's say, molecules or drugs or proteins, it sounds to me like sounds like more a quantum simulation than a computation, or I'm missing something.
Well, so the simulation is like, you can do the simulation on the classical computer, but you need to compute a lot of terms to approximate how things actually evolve through time. And thus you just well hit a wall at some point of time, and the classical simulation is not possible. So for the quantum effects, you can theoretically compute what is going on really in the system if you're using the quantum computer. So the reason for it is, for example, well, so the qubits are actually, let's say, they're somewhat like electrons. In some cases of quantum hardware, they're actually electrons. And thus, what we are getting is the possibility to really map the problem to the actual quantum mechanical system and thus make it evolve in the way we need, but with some restrictions. And thus, well, it's kind of tricky, so we don't have a hardware which allows to really model the system, but it allows to at least approximate some of the effects taking place in there.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the whole process of drug discovery, you describe 3 stages. What is the main bottleneck in these 3 stages? What's the main difficulty?
Well, that's really hard to say what is the main bottleneck in there. But as always, what we see is that the trials really take a lot of time because to be really sure that something works, we need to validate many things because we need to start with the cells, then go to mice, then go to humans, large populations, etc. It's just, it's not possible to solve the problem as long as we're not able to perfectly model human beings. Otherwise, we're just, well, we're stuck with the nature. We're stuck with how things should be. Otherwise, if we make mistake, we'll just kill billions of people. And that's not really a clever thing to do.
Yeah, and in this perspective, do you think that the doctors trust you, the outputs of the algorithms? Let's say you calculated something and you say, "Oh, that's a new drug which we have to discover and then use on mice, on people." Do you think, like, do you see that, let's say, people from the medical side, they're kind of encouraged of what you're doing, or they're kind of skeptical about that?
Okay, so two parts of the answer. So the first part, so most of the pharmas, they're really amazed with the artificial intelligence. They want to figure out how it works. They want to utilize it. But at the same time, what they see is that it's not really easy to trust it. It's not really easy to trust even computational scientists, which are not from the pharmaceutical space. And thus you need to make a lot of proofs as a computer scientist to pharmas to make them understand that it really works. So most of the pharmas are not really interested to collaborate with you unless you have passed a few trials, maybe a first or even as a second stage of trials on your own. And that's the issue in there.
And so when we're talking, let's say, about customers, we're talking about big pharmaceutical companies?
Well, most of the time, yes. So the large pharmaceutical companies, these are the guys who actually can do the most of the experiments. They can just throw money and get to the trials, iterate in many stages on there. Because, well, if you collaborate with small labs, yes, you can validate many things. You can go to trials. But without the collaboration with the pharma, most likely you're not able to make 10 steps back and forth between trials and modification, and then you're out of money and then you're out of the game. So it seems like the pharmas are, well, they're monopolizing the whole market, and computer scientists are trying to break that chain, but they're not really successful yet on that.
Yeah, I see. Maybe let me go to a different thread in our discussion. I would like to talk about your company, ApexQubit. Could you talk a little bit about foundation? What's the story? How did you start it?
Okay, sure. So there's a Dennis, so he's our CEO, and he has actually started the company in 2018. So the Dennis is the guy from the financial side, and he was really curious if he could use the quantum computations for the financial problems. But, well, rapidly he figured out that banks are not really ready for the AI, and even more, they're not ready for the quantum side. And thus, he made a lot of talks with the people on the quantum, science side, and he understood that the first people who are getting the advantage of the quantum are the guys from the pharmaceuticals or biochemistry. And thus, he decided to switch to the pharma, and we have started building actually protein folding solutions and then go into generation of new potential molecules, predicting their properties, etc. So basically, the company was started in 2018, and for the last year and a half, we were building multiple solutions which operate on the molecular side of things, trying to make experiments on the quantum and merge them in some way. So the history of the company is going this way. We're hiring people from all the world. We don't really care about location. So there are people from Canada, from the US, Europe, and we operate all together on all of this quest to find a better way to find drugs.
Yeah, and how many people right now in the team?
Well, there are 16 people, and it's like there are half of them like engineers, half of them are coming from, mixed background, maybe biochemistry, biology, or maybe the quantum computations or quantum mechanics. And all together, we're trying to synchronize what we have on our backgrounds to solve the problems more precisely and specifically.
Yeah, and did you start it with an academic grant or it was a private investment?
What do you mean by that?
So I mean, like how you start, what was your seed fund? Where did it come from? Did you have an academic grant, let's say, to start?
Well, actually, I think we don't really have a seed round for us. So we had a few accelerators on our side and a small VC fund. There was a Helsinki accelerators. The guys were so it's like they're really focused on the pharma side and biotechnology. They gave us a lot of expertise on all of these sides. There was a CDL, Creative Destruction Lab. So the guys are like, the largest accelerator in quantum in the world, I think. And they gave us really access to the quantum hardware. They gave us access to, the best scientists on the quantum for us. And it seems really promising for us, but for now we're looking for the seed round of investments, and it will be nice to find it.
Yeah. And what do you think is the main challenge or difficulty working on the startup or to start a startup?
Well, as always, to start a startup, you need to have money, at least at the beginning, because otherwise you're not able to concentrate on what you are doing, and thus you're not able to, find all the people you need. So you need to, express a lot of, global interest, global ideas to make everyone interested in what you are doing and join you. So it's really funny to have a team of 16 people working purely on the enthusiasm and shares of the companies. That's really great.
Yeah. So, but I think you have to have like maybe a natural charisma to attract these people and build the network, right? I guess.
Well, I suppose I don't really consider myself charismatic in many ways. At least for the last few years, I'm a little bit suppressed for many other factors, and I feel like, I'm not really able to attract people, but for some reason they're still joining the company. That surprises me.
No, maybe then you still can attract people. So maybe you have a special type of charisma.
Yeah, maybe.
Actually, I'm looking at the time, and probably will be my last question. So, what's your vision for the company for another, let's say, short term, let's say a few years, and then for the long term, let's say 10 years?
Okay, so for the short term, what we actually need to do is to jump over that wall of computations and finally get some results on prediction of binding affinity for RNAs. So what we're actually planned for the next, few years is trying to get some results on the preclinical trials, get into optimize our targets, optimize our ligands, and then go into collaborate with the pharma companies to allow us to really move forward, to scale, to cover the larger parts of the process. So in 10 years, ideally, what we are seeing. So for now, we're like the guys who are trying to computationally solve the problem. But in 10 years, we see ourselves as someone who is actually doing the whole drug design or drug discovery itself. So like, a very computationally driven pharma company, which finds the best drug candidates for targets in a very data science way with some quantum computations in there on a board. And it seems like we want to revolutionize what we have on the pharma side for now.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting vision. Okay, I think it's really time when I thank you for your time. I really enjoy talking to you. For me, it's always nice to hear possible application for the quantum technology. I really want to see this more and more in the world. Okay,
Sure.
I think thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.